So the communications need to start with not that the change is happening, but why it's happening. But training skips over desire. So if all we do is send people an email on Monday to go to training on Tuesday for a change that's going to be implemented on Wednesday, we're not going to have a successful change because, first of all, people haven't had a chance to process through their decision to participate. Maybe my people leader needs to encourage my participation and explain how it's going to impact me and why it's important in my job role to attend, what the expectations are for the training. So all of a sudden, it starts giving us the elevation that we need from change management being just communication training to being the discipline and the method and the mechanisms and the engagement activities to help everybody through their ADKAR journey.
Welcome to the Mindset Game podcast. It is such a delight to have Karen Ball here with us today. And for those of you who are not yet familiar with Karen, Karen is a senior fellow at Prosci, which is a leading global change management research and training organization. And for over 40 years, Karen has helped individuals and organizations implement effective changes and achieve benefits not thought possible, which is, Karen, so exciting to hear because this is a podcast about mindset, about possibilities. And, I think that's a big thing with change management. A lot of people are not really aware of what's possible. And so thank you for doing that. And I know you're going to help us with that today. I'm going to share a little bit more about your background as we introduce you. Karen is an ACMP-certified change management professional, also a certified IDEO Design Thinking practitioner, and the author of Prosci's latest publication, the ADKAR Advantage, Your New Lens for Successful Change. Previously, she was Executive VP of Prosci's Research Product and Marketing team. In addition to her role as an executive instructor, Karen continues to develop Prosci offerings and engage with clients as a change advisor, working with organizations such as UNICEF, Wells Fargo Bank, Bose Corporation, and Dow Chemical. On a personal note, I too am a certified Prosci change management practitioner and training coach teams on applying Prosci's ADKAR model. And I'm so excited to have you here, Karen, to share about this model, share stories about it so that those who are watching and listening to this can navigate change even more easily in their own lives and, of course, leading their teams through change. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
So how about we start with what is the ADKAR model?
Yeah, great part. You and I, we say it so naturally, and I hear people that say it. I was actually delivering a training course last week, and you just say ADKAR to the point where you forget, that it's an acronym that stands for 5 words. It has actually become a word almost, as if everybody speaks about it. But yes, ADKAR is a model, and as any model that we create, it's intended to represent things that are sometimes quite complex, and when you simplify them to the point where you're capturing the essence of reality in a way that's easy to communicate and it's easy for people to understand and it's accurate and it's actionable, you've got something. And so ADKAR is an acronym and it stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And those 5 words represent the outcomes. They are not activities, and we can talk about that in more detail, but they're the outcomes of what happens when somebody is going through change. We become aware that a change is needed. We need to understand why, what now, what if we don't, what are the options of, changing this or changing that? So it's all about understanding why a change is happening. And then we start progressing into the decisions that we make to engage and participate in the change. And that can be what's in it for me, personal motivators, organizational motivators, whatever the context for change. Then it's about knowledge, knowing how, about ability, being able, and then reinforcement. And of course, I flew through them very quickly. Just to give a very quick overview, but it is an acronym that stands for awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. And it's an individual change model. It's about me, it's about you, it's about everyone who's listening on this particular podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Karen. And can you share with us a little bit, for those people who are kind of newer to change management, what that even means, and kind of a little bit more of that kind of individual, as you said, like model? What does that mean? How does individual change relate to like bigger team or organizational change?
Yeah, interesting. When we think about it, and there's so much that sits behind this, it's almost like I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So ADKAR, the model, was developed, and I'm going to do a little bit of origin story because I think that'll help give context. I'm one of those kinds of people that I love context for things. So give me a place to anchor the thinking. But the ADKAR model was actually developed in the late 1990s by a gentleman, the name Jeff Hyatt. And Jeff was an engineer working with Bell Laboratories at the time. And he was fascinated by, as an engineer, right? Why do things work and some things don't work? How do things work? How do you dissect something from a process or a systems perspective down to the atomic level of how something happens? And he became really fascinated by why do some changes succeed and others fail. And he looked at it from engineering perspective, right? Is it process? Is it the way that the changes are designed? Is it what we're actually changing that is accurate or inaccurate to the problem or the opportunity? And he spent a lot of time, he left Bell Labs and really turned on, a whole research engine around this. And he spent about 4 years studying change patterns in over 700 organizations. And he came to the really fascinating realization that you can focus on all kinds of activities around change, right? The discipline of change management is we call it the people side of change. But it's how we support, equip, and enable people through a change process. But he discovered that underneath of the why do some changes fail and others succeed is that change management is a lot of activities, but underneath of it, we have to understand how to facilitate change with one person at a time. That there really isn't something called organizational change. It's just the collective change process of everyone impacted by change going through a successful change journey. And that's where Jeff, really built out and articulated those 5 outcomes that are described in the ADKAR model because they represent the 5 individual milestones or building blocks or sequential steps that each of us go through to make a successful transition from a current state to a future state. And that could be a very simple, fast, immediate change, right? I was working in a volunteer setting a couple of years ago, and it was pre-COVID, so we were all meeting in person. And the leader of the organization came in one night and said, "We're going to have to start meeting at a different location." So, immediately you're like, "Why?" "Oh, what's changed?" Right. So we found out, she communicated we have to move to a different location because there's going to be construction. Right. The facility that we've been using is going to go through some remodeling and construction. So, being aware that not that the change is happening, but why the change is happening, it's very easy to say, well, if I'm going to continue to engage, I need to choose to make the transition to the new location. I need to know where it is. I need to be able to get there from wherever I'm coming from. And of course, getting to the meetings on time and continuing to participate is reinforcement. So it's just a simple example of ADKAR in practice. And even though you may not break it down into those individual building blocks, that's exactly what happens when we're each going through a change. So it's an individual model. It's the process we each and everyone goes through to adopt and embrace a change. We understand why, and then we go through the process. So sitting underneath the discipline of change management, it gives us the context for the activities that we do in change management. And many people immediately think, oh, that's communications and training. Well, of course, communication and training especially in an organizational context, are critical to delivering successful change outcomes. But communication and training has to be purposeful to the ADKAR journey. So the communications need to start with not that the change is happening, but why it's happening. But training skips over desire. So if all we do is send people an email on Monday to go to training on Tuesday for a change that's going to be implemented on Wednesday, we're not going to have a successful change because, first of all, people haven't had a chance to process through their decision to participate. Maybe my people leader needs to encourage my participation and explain how it's going to impact me and why it's important in my job role to attend, what the expectations are for the training. So all of a sudden, it starts giving us the elevation that we need from change management being just communication training to being the discipline and the method and the mechanisms and the engagement activities to help everybody through their ADKAR journey.
Thank you for these examples and kind of the big picture. So for those people that are listening that maybe are going through some kind of a change in their organization and maybe their team members are not too enthusiastic about it, or maybe they're on the receiving end of a change initiative and they themselves are not enthusiastic about doing what they have been told they need to do. What advice do you have for them around how to kind of navigate, first of all, that decision to change? Because it's like, well, I don't want to do this, right? I don't want to go to this new location, for example, right? So how can they, as leaders, help people accept the change and come to that decision? Or as the receivers of the change, how do we come to that when we don't want to?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? And everybody thinks of the word desire. When Jeff Hyatt was developing the ADKAR model, he really spent a lot of time thinking about the words, right? The selection of the words that describe each of those individual change outcomes. And when he got to this one, he contemplated the concept of motivation. Is motivation, right? We go from awareness to being motivated. And what he started to assess and determine as he was examining all of these change patterns across organizations is motivation is just one aspect of desire. But what he was really trying to get to was the decision. And, sure, inside of organizations, there's changes that happen that we aren't necessarily motivated or desirous of the changes happening. So for an example, if I'm working in an accounting function or finance function of the organization, we've had this enterprise resource management tool for years, and I've become the subject matter expert. And people come to me for my knowledge and history and expertise, and I get a lot of satisfaction out of that. Certainly maybe a little bit of an ego drive, but other ways, right, of being of service and to say, you know what, I see the big picture. I understand the system aspects. People come to me and I get great joy and pleasure out of helping them. And then I look at this new upgrade of a new software capability and I'm like, ooh, maybe my subject matter expert role is potentially threatened. So why would I have a motivation or a desire to engage and participate and choose to come alongside that? So there's two things that could potentially happen. I can advocate for my own position in my ADKAR journey. When you understand the ADKAR model, you can test yourself against where am I? Am I all good on awareness? I understand why now, what if we don't? This all makes perfect sense to me. I'm stuck at desire, and we actually call that a barrier point. So you can actually put a score from 1 to 5 against each of the ADKAR elements. And I might say, yep, awareness, I'm a 4, I'm a 5, all good. Desire, I'm a 2. Right? Because I haven't chosen yet to participate. So anything a 3 or below, neutral or below, we consider to be a barrier point. So all the knowledge in the world is not going to fix my desire barrier. So it can happen two ways, or, I can own my position in that, right? I'm a recipient of change in the organization. I own where I am. I can go to my people leader and say, I'm having a tough time leaning into this change, choosing to, I see the organizational motivators. I see what's in it for us, but what's in it for me? And where I'm stuck is I've been a subject matter expert in what we've been doing, and I like that. And with a a people manager who sees and understands that, they can say, you know what, I would love to have you as the subject matter expert in the new environment. Would you be willing to go to some extra training? Can we get you into the software sooner? So all of a sudden you're problem solving. And my desire clicks on and I go, yes, because my individual motivator is to be in that service role to my team or to the broader function. So, that takes intuition, it takes trust, it takes communication, but it also could be my people manager sitting down with me in a coaching conversation. I may have no awareness of ADKAR as a model. And in a coaching conversation, my people leader could say, are you aware of why this change is happening? Have you chosen to participate? And that's when we would get to the same barrier. And I'd say, you know what, I'm actually having a little bit of a tough time, and here's what I'm feeling. So as organizations, right, we have to understand and represent change management as this collective set of engagement activities, communication and training, certainly, but effective sponsorship, effective people leader engagement, integration with our project management methodologies. I mean, there's lots of ways to bring ADKAR to life inside of our projects and change initiatives. Does that answer your question? It's kind of that essence of owning my position in my own progress through my ADKAR journey, but also having an organization that welcomes those conversations to help people through change.
Yeah, and a part of that is having the self-awareness, of how we're feeling toward a change, and expressing what it is that we need. And as part of that, as leaders, to create a safe environment where people can feel comfortable to express how they're feeling, what they need, without being judged or certainly punished in any way. And so there's so much change going on, Karen, in the world. And one of the things that I hear often from leaders is it's a lot.
It is
a lot to handle. And so when we're talking about not necessarily the CEO or president of the organization, but let's say at lower levels, there's like a double-sided kind of stress to this. Like, I'll give you an example. On Friday, I was training a group from Canada who were executives. And so they are managing both down and up, right?
Sure.
And so when we went through the ADKAR model, some of the questions were how do I get this? Like, let's say more options, more choices, so that I can feel more of a desire to change, a little bit more agency or control over the change. And so that's a real struggle when the people, who are initiating the change, let's say the top sponsors of the change, may not be aware of, awareness, desire, knowledgeability, and reinforcement as, foundational needs, for somebody to go through a change. And so how do we manage that when we don't necessarily have the agency, or in our perception, the agency to be able to control going through a change, not going through a change, or adapting how it's being, initiated?
Yeah, there's a lot of gosh, I'd like to say that there's a lot of connectors that you can start creating. You can create ADKAR. I mentioned it just a minute ago, to your project methodologies. So how does change get introduced inside of your organization? And a lot of organizations, that happens through projects or change initiatives. So as organizations are doing their planning efforts and they're focusing on what are our strategic initiatives and what are our operational initiatives and what are those continuous improvement places inside of the organization, is that when we start connecting change management and even ADKAR milestones right inside of our project management methodologies, in addition to those stage gates, whether you're doing waterfall or agile, right? You've got markers or stage gates for deliverables. So you can build ADKAR milestones right inside of your project framework. So we've got an early awareness milestone, a late awareness milestone, and a desire milestone, and so forth. And then you can have mechanisms or measurements for whether or not you've achieved them. And when you do that across multiple projects, you can start to create a visual or a heat map of everything that's happening, who it's happening to, when it's happening, how much of an impact it has, And you can start getting a clearer picture of what it feels like to sit in the organization receiving all of these changes. And I think when you talk about the concept of agency, that's really critical, because many times we feel like the changes are happening to us, not through and with us. And the mindset shift to through and with is so much more powerful than to. And to own your, I may not be able to control what's happening and when it's happening, but I can choose how to respond, how to ask for the support I need to be successful, and to ask for clarity around the bigger picture. So being able to create the concept of what are all the changes, who are they impacting, how are they impacting them, where are they in their ADKAR journeys? And that's where change management and the structure and process of a full methodology wraps entirely around the ADKAR model. So sometimes it's just visibility. And I'll tell you what, sometimes it's just getting clarity on what's changing, because it's easy sometimes to say, oh, we're going to implement this X, right? Fill in the blank. New software, new process, new policy, new roles, new compensation structure, new performance management system, all the whatever the net new is, or the enhancement improvement. And I immediately go, the sky is falling, right? The sky is falling. Everything's going to be different. I don't know how I'm going to survive. And sometimes when somebody can just say to me and go, Karen, in this particular change, there's going to be a little bit of process change, not a whole lot, but there's going to be a little bit of process change. And then reporting structures are going to be matrixed a little bit differently. And here's where I'm going to help you do that. But really, that's it. That's what's changing. So again, the more we can give clarity around what is changing, who it impacts, when it's happening, and then recognition of those ADKAR journeys, we build a system that empowers change more globally, more holistically. So, and then when we get really good at it, right? Organizations who've taken the journey down, we're going to build change as a capability. We're going to just be really good at change because it's not going to slow down, right? We know we've got bigger, faster, more complex, more interconnected, more cross-functional, more global changes. If we're not good at it, we're going to get left behind somewhere along the way, right? We're going to lose in the competitive front. We're going to, not have the cost structures we need, the efficiency structures we need, the value structures we want to create. So organizations who take this on and say, we're going to get really good at change, they do this very holistically, all the way from enterprise change down to that individual change model.
Yeah, and I think that that's the key, is the holistic perspective and the longer term perspective. Because at the end of the day, if employees know in their hearts that the leaders have their back, that they truly care, that it's a safe environment, it's safe to fail, it's safe if their productivity is going to dip a little bit, then, it's safe to ask for what they need, and it will be, acknowledged and respected and valued. All of that is really, really important, especially in a world where there's so much stress and overwhelm. The default state of people who are going through change is not quite, resilient these days. There's just, for most people, there's just so many layers of change and just that saturation of just so many things going at the same time, so much uncertainty, including personal life. Just a lot of kids are going through a hard time, and, there's just a lot of mental health things going on in general in our world, which make change even more intense than it would otherwise be. So what is
we don't separate who we are at home from who we are at work, right? Everything that's stressing and compounding comes with us, which makes it even more difficult. And one of the things that we hear from organizations around the world around ADKAR is it creates common language. And that common language gives us a place to now anchor something that is hard to describe. I like to use the two words sense making and wayfinding. So ADKAR helps us make sense of change, right? The individual process we all go through. And then you can composite those individual changes into organization change. So I can help a group of 5 or 10 or 50 or stories of 50,000, 90,000 people being architected through transformation journeys through the lens of ADKAR. So it's incredibly scalable, right? The activities that we do in service to ADKAR outcomes is scalable, right? I can do this enterprise communication strategy around why now, what if we don't, and build all of that out. But it makes change make sense. And then it gives us wayfinding so that we can scan and act. So we can scan the context for change and see where people are in their ADKAR journeys. When you give them the language, I can say, I have a desire barrier point. Help me, right? I want to get there. I'm just not there yet. Or you have the surveys or the conversations that support that. But the wayfinding is you can look at this complexity and scan and act. You can get to what matters and where people are in the change process. And you can look at it across multiple changes. You can look at it in the context of a deep dive on a single change. But I think the sense-making and wayfinding elements are calming, right? So they help calm systems of stress and complexity by understanding that there's something real and relevant that sits underneath of it that can drive our activities and our outcomes, drives our communication and our conversations. And we can find our way through. And when you feel a sense of, yes, it's complex and we can find our way through. And then when you start building a history of being good at it, you can say, we find our way through most of the time. We're pretty good at this. Then you get calmed by those successes. And then, of course, the senior leadership, we know from, all of years of Prosci's research that active and visible sponsorship is the number one indicator for success. So this is something that has to live and exist, not just in the individual mindsets. If someone, learns ADKAR and can advocate for themselves, that's amazing. But then when it starts getting more broadly accepted across groups or teams or projects or functions or enterprises, it creates that common context that everybody can anchor to. And having anchors is important, right?
Yeah.
I mean, any of us who've coached or seen someone, go through stress, people who have anxiety, right? Anchoring is a critical component of stress management. I need to anchor to something. And when I can anchor to where am I and why am I feeling this way? And am I just not getting what I need? Am I not asking for what I need, or is my organization not serving it? Then you can advocate. And being an advocate, that means I can gain more agency just in the way I respond, not just in the way I receive.
Yeah, I so appreciate that you're saying that, because I think that one of the things about Prosci and the ADKAR model in particular is that you know what to expect, right? Because there is 25 years of research, about this stuff and, human psychology through change and how people adapt to change and what works and what doesn't. And so when we know what we can expect, it gives us some level of control, if you will, over an uncertain process. Because we know, as you said, kind of what to expect and also what to do. What are some tools that we can go to, support that we can go to, and so on. And so can you share with us a couple of stories?
I love the stories, and I've got my own, but my stories are interesting and fun. And I was first introduced to the ADKAR model in 2006, and I was working in an IT function. I was helping organizations implement large scale IT changes, and they were investing millions and millions of dollars and just not seeing the benefits, and weren't doing a good job of helping each person who was impacted by these changes, go from their current state to the future state, and that human side of change, the people side of change, the how people go through. But when we first introduce people to the ADKAR model, we have them apply it in a personal setting first. So we ask people to pick a change challenge, an adoption challenge that they, a friend, a partner, a relative, somebody is going through, and apply the ADKAR process and the scoring mechanism that I described to a personal change, so you can see where that change is stuck and how to unlock it. And I just went through the process of collecting ADKAR stories from all over the world, personal, professional, individual, organizational. And so just so many fun stories. But A great example, there's a gentleman that I write up in the new ADKAR book who, as an adult, his wife said to him, "Honey, wouldn't it be great if you learned how to swim?" Because as a child, he had never learned how to swim. He had a traumatic experience as a child at the swimming pool, and swimming was just not his thing. And they were on the cusp of becoming parents, and his wife had decided that that was a skill that he should have. So he took himself through the journey of becoming a proficient swimmer through the lens of ADKAR. And it's just fun. It was a fun story because he, went through awareness. And yes, I was very aware because my wife was telling me it was important to her. And if it's important to her, it's important to me. And he did decide that desire was his barrier point. So he actually had to go back and do a little bit of soul searching of why, what did that traumatic experience mean to him as a child? Why didn't he make it through, how he had gotten away with, not being at a lake or a pool or doing all the things that children do around water. And then he just once he made the desired decision, yes, I'm in, he scheduled all these trainings, right? He's glad I was taking swimming lessons at 2 different clubs at the same time and, learning from a 15-year-old instructor. And then, he wanted to rush knowledge to ability, which we know from knowledge to ability and swimming is a great example, right? Knowing how and being able are 2 different things. And so he had to close the gap in knowledge to ability and how he went from a pool, not over his head, to over his head, to a lake, to ocean. And then eventually he showed his wife on a surprise visit to a Y, an indoor swimming pool at a Y, that he had developed his swimming skills. But, what a fun story of Graham learning to swim. There's one of a woman named Anna Boleyn who got her 6-year-old son to Joachim to eat broccoli. And she figured out that it was, she connected all of a sudden, as parents, we say to our children, eat this, it's good for you, right? I mean, we kind of stop at the eat this, it's good for you. But she went in and said, well, what is his individual motivators? And at 6, he was starting to play sports and he wanted to be stronger and faster. So she's like, if you eat broccoli, it has these nutrients, and these nutrients in your body help make you stronger and faster. So then he was willing to try it. But she said, knowledge was, what's he going to eat? And she broke it down. And then the wonderful end of the story is she and her son now go grocery shopping together. And they talk about the nutrients in food in terms of what he wants and what motivates him. So, again, just fun stories, but then we've also got stories of organizations with, 10, 20, 50,000 people, a pharmaceutical organization going through 5,000 digital migrations of software and systems to get to this transformation journey over many years. And they architected the entire process of 50,000 people through the lens of ADKAR. And their project leaders are convinced, and I know that they wouldn't have, delivered the benefits on time and on, in the structure that they did if they hadn't architected those journeys. So, so I collected over, 50 stories from around the world, and they're just fascinating to read. But, underneath every single one of them, there's just people trying to deliver the outcomes of successful change, whether those are self-imposed and chosen, or they're, part of our, work world where our organizations naturally have to make changes to continue to compete or to continue to serve and to deliver successful change outcomes. But underneath of it all is just all of the individuals who are impacted going through their ADKAR journeys.
Thank you for those examples. It really is, incredible to consider the fact that personal change, our own, or, people in our lives that we care about, organizational change, the process is the same. The needs are the same. We all need awareness of why the change is happening. We need to feel that sense that, it's a decision that we've made, that it's something that's beneficial for us, for our well-being, for our future, and so on. To have the knowledge, the ability, and the positive reinforcement to continue to do that new behavior. So I wonder if it might be helpful to maybe go one by one back to awareness, desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. We started with kind of just a very big overview, zoomed in a little bit to some awesome examples. I wonder if we can go back to each of the letters in the acronym and maybe just giving a couple of examples of how people can utilize that to help themselves and others feel even safer and more engaged in the change?
Sure. So, I mentioned earlier in terms of awareness, one of the things that Prosci has done, we're really focused on knowledge transfer, and knowledge transfer happens when things are easy and simple to communicate. So we use things like plain language questions or plain language statements. So awareness is awareness, why a change is happening, right? So you're able to say, I understand why. So once you say, I understand why, you're progressing through your awareness milestone. But those are the why now, what if we don't, what is changing, what isn't changing, the details about the change itself. Desire, as we mentioned, is that decision to participate and support the change. So it's not just the what's in it for me, but it's what are the organizational motivators? How do those align with or not align with my individual motivators? And so the I question or the I statement is, I have decided to support and participate the change. And, that's a tough one sometimes. I've worked with organizations who are going through rather complex changes that don't have a great what's in it for me story. So understanding, the connection between organizational motivators and individual motivators is critical. And sometimes the organizational motivators supersede the individual. So if I want to continue to be part of this organization, if I want to continue to, serve the organization in my role, I'm going to need to lean into this change. It may not be what I love or wanted to do, but this is where the organization is going, and I understand why. Right. So coming from desire back to awareness, I understand why. Knowledge is knowing how. So this is what are the required skills and behaviors. Sometimes it's mindset, sometimes it's attitudes and beliefs, sometimes it's, policy, process, system, tools, all the things that can be changing. I know how. And the I statement is, I know how to do what I'm being asked to do. And then, as I mentioned, that what we call the K to A gap, right? From knowledge to ability means I am able to, and knowing how and being able are two different things. Sometimes it takes coaching, and sometimes it takes time and proficiency. Sometimes, go back to Graham learning to swim. He had to get in the water and practice his skills in order to develop that ability. And that happens in the work environment too. And you mentioned this earlier, like the dip in productivity that could potentially occur. We need to recognize that when people are going from training knowledge, I know how, to being able, there may be a dip in productivity. And we need to recognize that supporting people through that is to support them through that dip and back up as they build their proficiency. That's an area a lot of organizations don't focus on because they're trying to move change so quickly that they think knowledge equals ability. So again, what is the gap? And it could be small. It could just be a day or two practice and I'm good, right? Or it could be months of reinforcement and learning and new engagement styles to get that knowledge to ability gap closed. And then reinforcement, we need to make sure that the change sticks. So the I statement is, I will continue to. So those are measurements and mechanisms and all of the things we do in organizations to establish a reinforcing capability. So a good example is I've seen cases where performance metrics pre-change and performance metrics post-change are the same. And what we look at is people are reverting back to previous behaviors because that's what they're compensated to do. So sometimes we have to look at the way that we're structurally reinforcing the change. But one thing I haven't really mentioned inside of this is the people who are doing this. Our sponsors are really critical, the people who are leading the change. We look to the leaders of our organization to share those awareness and reinforcement mechanisms. We look to our people leaders to help us go from awareness through desire, knowledge, ability, and reinforcement. I want to go to my people leader and get that coaching or that feedback or that guidance and support. So in addition to the process, there's also roles inside of our organizations that we can activate specifically to those ADKAR outcomes to drive outcomes and progress much more quickly through the process. So that's what each of the elements are. Hopefully that's enough detail. It's just like an onion. You start peeling it back and peeling it back and peeling it back. You get to the point where you can build, very structured project management approaches with the ADKAR milestones baked in, and work very closely with the people in the organization who are, again, leaning into the people side of change and helping go through those reinforcing mechanisms so that we can measure outcomes and continue on through our change journeys.
Yeah. And what happens if the leaders or the sponsors of the change don't do this, right? Like, help to create more awareness, desire, knowledgeability, and reinforcement. Like, what are we seeing in organizations? How is this a problem if we don't do it right?
Yeah, sponsorship is a great conversation. I enjoy spending time with people who sit in sponsor roles very frequently. And, one of the things, Prosci as an organization is a research-based organization, and we've been studying that sponsor challenge for years because we know it's so critical to success. But we've articulated 3 roles of an effective sponsor: that they're actively building, the environment, right? Actively communicating and coaching, but building coalitions and doing the communication. So active and visible, building coalitions and communicating. And what I find is I've sat down with many, many senior leaders. Nobody shared with them what their role is, right? So once you sit down and go, here's why you're so important to the outcomes, 90% or more of those leaders want to do what they should do to be effective sponsors of change. It's just that nobody's ever sat and coached them on what it means and guide them, right? As a change leader, I can say, I need you in this meeting on this day at this time. It's booked on your calendar. And here's 3 of the things I really need you to emphasize: the why now, what if we don't, and what expectations are. And when you can build this roadmap and plan for your sponsors, I have not found anyone across the years in organizations who aren't willing to do that if they are guided and coached themselves through their role fulfillment. So a lot of times it's just, good conversations. Now, you do run into some people who think that they just signed the charter or signed the checks. That's their sponsor role. And so you're elevating the concept of what does it mean to be an active and visible sponsor of change. And they're generally open to those conversations. And I've also heard, why hasn't anybody ever taught me this before? Why didn't I learn this earlier in my career? Which is a great question that, we don't really talk about what it means to be an effective sponsor of change. And there are times we lose our sponsor, they're not at the right level. And, we have to, as change leaders, change practitioners, use our intuition. I have stood up a coalition of sponsors versus a primary sponsor because this primary sponsor just wasn't accessible or was so entirely, engaged in other changes. They just didn't have the space in their schedules for the work. So build a sponsor coalition and say, well, who are the proxies for the sponsor in this particular context? So that's where we go from, a checklist to the intuition and the natural state of knowing how important sponsorship is and then figuring out how to make that happen for a particular project or change initiative.
Yeah, and it's so important, like you said, because a lot of leaders think, even when they maybe were going through their own career journeys, that they were just kind of told what to do and they did it. And the reality is that that's not quite the case. And it's even more so these days when there's a lot of competing demands for people's attention and a lot of stress.
Yeah, and one of the things I have found, to be, quite successful is to sit down with the sponsor. You need to build the relationship. What is your style? How do you like to engage? How can I help you be an active and visible sponsor in this particular project or change initiative and really learn from them? I've read, articles they've written or emails that they've written to get their style. And then, craft a message for them and say, here's the key message I need you to send. Are you willing to endorse and support and send this message? Here's when it needs to go out because here's the timing on our project and so forth. And when you make it easy for them to be successful, they are more than willing to participate.
And what percentage of change programs fail, organizational change programs fail these days?
We've seen numbers over the years, I think the 70% number is, I don't know if that's, lore or legend at this point. We like to focus on the percentage of change initiatives that succeed and deliver their intended results and outcome. And when we know that we implement effective change management and help through the activities that are conducted, help everyone through their ADKAR journeys, we're 7 times more likely to meet or exceed our project objectives. So it goes from like 13% with fair or poor change management to over 88% with effective change management. When you support, equip, and enable people through those individual change journeys, you're going to get the benefits as a result.
That's right. That's right. And there's just so much more ease. And, throughout the whole process, people feel more comfortable. There's more joy. It's just lighter,
It's lighter. And again, you get a sense of ownership and accountability and agency just through knowing that your organization sees you, understands the process, and is intentionally taking the organization through those steps in a way that you trust. That people are going to share, when they can. There are changes that happen in organizations that we can't, in full disclosure, tell everyone why this change is happening, right? There might be something very strategic or that you need to hold a little closer to the vest. But to be able to say to people, we will tell you more when we're able to do so. We understand how critical your change journey is. That builds that trust. It's that the authentic communications that, people know, hey, we'll know when we need to know, and my organization will be there to support me. And if I need something, I can voice myself that I need something. And those are all very empowering places to be.
And that's true for the sponsors too, because I've heard from sponsors, that they themselves don't have, awareness, desire, knowledgeability, and reinforcement necessarily. So, it's about understanding what do we need and what do we need to ask for at whatever level of the organization we are and however we're impacted. And
we need to remember that our people managers and our sponsors, they're individual employees as well. So when we can help them through their own ADKAR journeys, and I say we, the general, the change discipline, the change management professional or practitioner, that we need to help them go through their own ADKAR journeys. And when they get from awareness to desire, we use the phrase, put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. We know that, from our airline travels. But that's what happens in change too. I have to help myself. And it's hard for me as a people leader or sponsor to be an advocate for change if I haven't also gone through my own ADKAR journey. So, again, clearly articulating the why now, and what if we don't? I've seen senior leadership teams sit around a table on a particular project or change initiative, and they're not fully aligned across the table of why a particular change is happening. And they need to sort through those questions in order to be able to communicate them directly to their employees and to be of one mind and one voice. Right. And that happens too in organizations where you ask 2 people, 5 people, 10 people, you get different answers. So getting to that place of common language, common understanding, common engagement, it's just, again, it de-stresses, it lets people know we've got this process, and it's proven it works. Here's some examples how it's proven and it works, and this is how we're going to engage change.
Yeah, I love that, because I obviously change starts with each of us, whether we're the change management practitioner in the company, the leader, the sponsor, part of the sponsorship coalition. And if we have doubt, or if we are experiencing some distress over some aspect of the change, we're missing something that we need, or, then obviously that's going to be radiated out, whether we speak it or not, energetically, that's going to be radiated. And some other people might lean away from the change, might not trust us, trust the change, trust themselves to be able to navigate the change. And so doing our own work is so important. And I'm so thankful for you, Karen, because I think that the gifts that you've given us today are so important for anyone that's going through a change themselves or leading change, or both. To really understand, what do I need? What are the 5 main building blocks for any transition? What am I missing? What do I need more of? And how can I help myself and others feel safe to navigate change? And one of the beautiful things when people apply the ADKAR model is that there's even more coherence, even more trust in the teams, more rapport. And as you said earlier, that creates even more change readiness, if you will, for the next time that, they need to adapt to something or some change is happening that we need to respond to. And it's just
readiness is a great, it's a great positive frame on resistance, because ADKAR helps us get everyone ready. And one of the words you mentioned, cohesion, the other word that comes to, so many of the ADKAR stories I've collected is confidence. That they feel confident that the actions that they're taking are the right things to be doing to advance the change, and the right things to be doing for the people in the organization. So it's a win-win-win for our projects, our change initiatives, and our people.
Yeah, and I invite everybody listening to check out those resources. Karen, how can they access resources about the ADKAR model, about Prosci, having you or others come and support them throughout their change initiatives?
Yeah, the best thing to do is just go to prosci.com, prosci.com. And you can find me personally on LinkedIn, Karen Ball 26, LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out. But there's lots of information. Just go to the Prosci website, type in ADKAR, and you're going to get thought leadership articles and webinars and blog posts and all kinds of content and resources that are free to everyone. We want to make this fully available. And it's baked into our methodology for people like myself and yourself who've gone through the practitioner training. ADKAR is at the center of everything we do.
Yeah, and I invite people to check out your book, The ADKAR Advantage, your new lens for change, for successful change. And I know there's lots of great stories and examples for people about how to apply this. So thank you.
Learn more about Graham and Anna Boleyn and 48 other stories on individual and organizational change.
That's awesome. Thank you for compiling that and sharing that. I think the more examples, the better. It brings us to life.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Hey, Game Changers, it's Vered. Thanks for tuning in to this episode with Karen Ball about the ADKAR model and some of the basics to change management, helping you transition through change and help others experience more ease during times of change. And if you want to learn even more about change management, I invite you to check out my episode with Lino Casalino. It's episode 167. And Lino is my old boss when I used to work as a change management consultant at PwC. And he truly is an expert in this arena. You're going to learn a whole lot, and I hope you enjoy that as well. So all my love, and thank you for tuning in. If you haven't already subscribed, be sure to do so. Bye for now.